In this video, I'm going to outline the common signs that you've been abused by a narcissist in your life. So, what is narcissistic abuse? Narcissistic abuse may include emotional, physical, verbal, psychological, and sexual abuse committed by someone who displays narcissistic personality traits. Narcissistic abuse is a very specific and poorly understood type of abuse characterized by deception. Narcissists intentionally construct a false persona to lure in their targets using love bombing to encourage them to become vulnerable quickly and to trust them completely. So, what are the signs of narcissistic abuse? Number one sign, they provoke you and then blame you for reacting. This is the textbook sign of narcissistic abuse. It's called gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most dangerous and insidious forms of emotional abuse. Gaslighters love to provoke others. They take inventory of the things that upset you and then do more of those things. You will likely react calmly the first 3 or 4 times, thinking you resolved the issue. But then they do it again and again and again. You think, how in the world could someone be this dense? Eventually you react less calmly. This is when the gaslighter jumps on you and accuses you of being hysterical, crazy, sensitive, negative, paranoid, bipolar, or mentally ill. They tell you to calm down and make you feel ashamed of your normal reaction to their unacceptable behavior. They use your reaction to show others how unstable you are. They make you feel ashamed for your own reaction. Number 2 sign of narcissistic abuse. You experience constant overwhelming self-doubt. Victims of narcissistic abuse experience a constant overwhelming feeling of self-doubt, feeling uncertain about things and constantly seeking validation about if doing the right thing is common. Actually, this is learned reactive adaptation that victims develop to cope with how the narcissistic abuser is constantly blaming, finger-pointing, and accusing them of things they did not do. Victims are forced to accept responsibility for things they didn't do or say. This is how the narcissist humiliates and induces shame in their victims. Number 3 sign of narcissistic abuse. You have non-existent boundaries. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you find it hard to speak up, say what you truly think, and stand your ground on what is important to you. When you do these things, you are rejected, criticized, punished, or even abandoned. To minimize this, you don't speak up, don't say what you think, and you let your boundaries fall away. It becomes more important to keep the peace with the narcissist than to express our opinions and feelings. Number 4 sign of narcissistic abuse. You have a constant sense of mistrust. Victims of narcissistic abuse have been conditioned to believe that everyone around them is a threat and they cannot be trusted. You even lack trust in yourself. Victims experience anxiety and hypervigilance about the intention of others. This is a sign of narcissistic abuse and gaslighting. They have convinced you that this mistrust is valid. Number 5 sign of narcissistic abuse. Dissociation from emotions and experiences. Victims of narcissistic abuse feel emotionally and even physically detached from the emotions and experiences, which disrupt self-perceptions and memory formation. Narcissist abusers use intimidation, emotional, physical, and mental abuse, isolation, economic abuse, sexual abuse, coercion, control, and dissociation is an automatic coping mechanism against overwhelming stresses of this abuse. Your brain finds ways to emotionally block out the impact of your pain so that you don't have to deal with the full terror of your circumstances. Number 6 sign of narcissistic abuse. You live life walking on eggshells. A common sign of narcissistic abuse or trauma is for you to constantly try to avoid anything that may trigger a trauma memory. You find yourself constantly watching what you say or do around this person so that you don't trigger an outburst or punishment. In turn, when the abuser does have an outburst, you feel as though you caused it to happen and it is your fault. You become perpetually anxious about provoking your abuser in any way and may avoid confrontation or setting boundaries as a result. Number 7 sign of narcissistic abuse. You isolate yourself. It is common for narcissists to slowly push away the friends and family of their victim. The victim also will begin to isolate themselves on purpose because they feel ashamed about the situation they are in. It is common in our society to have misconceptions and blame the victim for the emotional and psychological abuse. They fear no one will understand or believe them, so instead of reaching out for help, they decide to withdraw from others as a way to avoid judgment and retaliation from the abuser. Number 8 sign of narcissistic abuse: you have unexplainable physical symptoms. When victims have been in their situation for extended periods of time, the mental and psychological abuse can begin to exhibit physical symptoms. These symptoms seem to be completely unrelated and can range in complexity from person to person. Some physical symptoms that may develop can include insomnia, nightmares, eating difficulties and nightmares, irritability, hypervigilance, easily startled, flashbacks, hopelessness, psychosomatic illnesses, self-harming, and thoughts of suicide. Number 9 sign of narcissistic abuse: you protect your abuser. Victims from an intense trauma bond between victim and abuser because the victim is trained to rely on the abuser for his or her survival. Victims may protect the abusers from legal consequences, portray a happy image of the relationship on social media, or overcompensate by sharing the blame of the abuse. Number 10 sign of narcissistic abuse: you set aside your needs to please your abuser. How many of your dreams and goals have you set aside because your boyfriend, husband, wife, or parent did not agree with them? You feel as if you are living just to fulfill the needs and goals of that other person. You once felt like the narcissist's entire life revolved around you. Now your entire life revolves around them. You may have placed your goals, hobbies, friendships, and personal safety on the back burner just to ensure that your abuser feels content in the relationship. Number 11 sign of narcissistic abuse: you develop self-harming tendencies or suicidal ideation. Victims of emotional abuse experience depression and anxiety along with feelings of hopelessness in their situation. They feel like no matter what they do, they will never be able to escape, and there is nothing they can do to change their situation. This sort of learned helplessness can cause them to engage in self-harming behaviors as a way to cope with the pain they are feeling. Victims of intimate partner violence are twice as likely to attempt suicide multiple times. Abusers can essentially commit murder without ever being held responsible for it. Number 12 sign of narcissistic abuse: you are in a constant state of confusion. Narcissists are masters at changing expectations and rules halfway through something. This in turn keeps you guessing how to please them. Keeping their victim in a constant state of confusion is key for their tactic to work for them. When the expectations and rules change daily, it can start to wear their victims down, and you no longer know what is right and what is wrong. It's confusing to logically know that you aren't responsible for someone else's behavior. Gaslighting typically happens very gradually in a relationship. In fact, the abusive partner's actions may seem harmless at first. Over time, however, these abusive patterns continue, and a victim can become confused, anxious, isolated, and depressed, and they can lose all sense of what is happening. The victim then starts relying on the abusive partner more and more to define reality, which creates a very difficult situation to escape. Number 13 sign of narcissistic abuse: you have complex PTSD symptoms. As a result of chronic emotional abuse, victims may struggle with complex PTSD symptoms.